our discussion on today's webinar. The topics that I was talking about are right here in front of you. So we begin with four topics which are a blend between social issues, general studies, a little bit history, economics, geography, everything rolled into one. They are highly multidisciplinary, the way UPSC exam is supposed to be nowadays. The very first topic talks about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Now we all know that United Nations has a set of 17 SDGs which need to be achieved by 2030. But India as a country and as a society, what has it been doing really to achieve these goals? Has it been successful? Or still are we struggling and lagging behind? So that is exactly what we shall see in the topic number one. Topic number two talks about, from a very historical and social perspective, the similarity and yet the mild or the subtle difference between the ideologies of Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So we cover a host of ideas regarding caste untouchability, nationalism, democracy, and many other things, just to show that where are they matching with each other and what exactly is different between them. The third topic talks about reservation or positive discrimination, which is extremely crucial for all the students of sociology, given that in their paper 2 of the optional subject, there is a huge unit which talks about social justice, not just sociology, but also GS paper 2, UPSC mains, talks about reservation, its implications, so on, and associated problems. And hence we talk about what are the concerns which India as a society is facing right now with regards to reservation policy. Now the fourth topic is very, very easy. It's nothing but just a quick observation on what is happening in terms of rural transformation or the social economic change that's happening in India's rural community. What are we doing as a society? What has the government been doing? Where are we failing and what needs to be done? These are certain things that we speak about here. And the last topic, as I said, is completely sociological, because here we talk about a very interesting topic. Now, not all students of sociology may have read this topic, even when they have it as their optional in UPSC. Because normally this topic is dealt with either in the third year of your undergrad course or in your BA honors course with sociology or in your master's course. That's very, very prominent there. UPSC deals with a very small segment of this, known as symbolic interactionism or simply symbolic interaction. Now, this is a blend, a place where psychology and sociology overlap with each other. So, what is this really? And what is the meaning of symbolic interactionism? With respect to two concepts here, one is race and the other is gender. So, these are the topics that we have for you here. I really, really hope that you enjoy these topics. You love getting to know new perspectives on them. Wherever you shall have a question, kindly feel free. Let's have a very interactive session. That's my request to you. And all your questions shall be addressed from our side. So with this in mind, let's begin with the very first topic then that talks about sustainable development goals. As a society, what are the targets which India has actually achieved proudly? But what are the targets really on which we are missing or lagging behind as such? But even before this, what is sustainable development goal? Even before that, what is sustainable development? Even before that, what do you even mean by the word sustainable? It's much more than just a word which has a positive connotation. It's much more than an English word. Sustainable. Let's have a look. Now, if you talk in a very, very scientific and a technical way, the very word sustainable development was introduced, or for the first time introduced and mentioned by a lady known as Barbara Ward. Now, she was famous because she was also the founder of International Institute of Environment and Development way back in 1970s. And she had just spoken about this concept. She had not defined it in detail. A better detail emerged when, much later in 1987, there was a conference called United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development. Now, this institution released a very famous report. This report is also known as Our Common Future. It is also called as the Brundtland Report. In this report, the word sustainable development was very, very properly defined for the first time. So, what do we mean by sustainable development? To even understand this, it's important to know the word sustainable. Sustainable is anything which is long-term, durable. How long can it last? Sustainable is not about something that's good or that's bad. It's much more about something that can last very, very long. For example, a very small example, the renewable resources of nature like water, air, wind, solar energy, these are sustainable because these will last very, very long. They can keep recycling, they can keep regenerating themselves. On the other hand, fossil fuels like coal, kerosene, petroleum, diesel, or other such things which are fossil fuels. Now we know that they aren't sustainable because they will not sustain for a very long period of time. So sustainability is about durability. How long can something actually exist? And hence the word sustainable development, as highlighted by this report, means a kind of development where you are trying to meet your present needs, the needs of today, without compromising on the needs of the future generations. Because if we as a generation use up all the resources which Earth or our planet has to give us, then what shall the future generations use? They will soon run out of fresh water. They will probably run out of fossil fuels and other minerals. Why? Because we are overexploiting, and hence sustainable development means that development and nature have to go hand in hand. We cannot ignore ecosystem, or we cannot ignore ecology in the name of economic growth and development, which means that you have to satisfy your needs in such a way that you have to absolutely take care of the needs of the coming generations. All right, and that is sustainable development for you. Now, there are certain components of sustainable development which are also known as pillars of sustainable development, because sustainable development stands on the basis of these three pillars or dimensions or components, as you may like to call it, and these are economic, environmental, and social. All right, and which is that document, which is that action plan, or which is that agenda which talks about proper and thorough implementation of these three components? That particular document is known as Agenda 21. Now, this is a massive document. It is a very heavy document, almost like 900 to 1,000 pages, and it was a result of the very famous Earth Summit that was held in 1992 in South America, a country called Brazil. All football lovers swear by Brazil. Now, this time it was Argentina, but otherwise Brazil is so famous, in the minds of all football fans, really. So do remember that the Earth Summit in 1992 happened in Brazil, in a place called Rio de Janeiro. All right, and out of this summit, there was a declaration or an action plan created called Agenda 21, and this Agenda 21 is very special. Why? Why? Because it talks about things like fighting poverty and promoting sustainable urban planning. It talks about many other things. For example, protecting marine resources, oceans, and fisheries. It also talks about strengthening the role of women, local governments, and NGO, non-governmental organizations, of protecting against deforestation. And hence, this Agenda 21 becomes extremely important in implementing all the pillars of sustainable development, which is these three pillars, almost accounting to issues like deforestation, women's rights, safeguarding the role of NGOs, of course, protecting your nature, ecology, fighting poverty. All right, and adopting a technology which is extremely environmentally friendly or eco-friendly technology. Now, also remember kindly that Action 21 is a very important declaration, but it is a non-binding action plan. Do remember, it is not binding, it is not legal, but it is a guideline for all the member countries of the UN to come up and try to achieve the three components of sustainable development. So I hope you understand till now that what is sustainable development. If yes, then now we can actually talk about the 17 SDG goals. But before that, let's pause because I want to tell you something which you must remember always. Now, where did the sustainable development goals come from? Out of the blue, who decided that we should have sustainable development goals? Well, there is a small history here. Don't worry, it's not a boring kind of history. It's kind of interesting. Now, much before in 2000, when the world realized, when all the major countries, in fact, even the developing countries were realizing that something is missing, the earth is deteriorating at a very fast, rapid rate. There is a major pollution happening everywhere. So many economies are going under recession. There is a problem because we are getting overpopulated. At that point of time, United Nations and its member countries decided to adopt a set of 8 goals or 8 targets. Now, these were known as Millennium Development Goals. Okay, Millennium Development Goals. This happened in 2000, and UN decided that by 2015, we will achieve all these 8 Millennium Development Goals. And what were these 8 goals? They were all about fighting poverty, creating an eco-friendly technology, bridging problems like health problems and primary education, and many such similar agendas. But talking is one thing and doing is another. We all make resolutions in New Year, but we end up breaking most of them, sadly. And something similar happened with the UN this time. 2015 came, but still, we had hardly achieved any of the Millennium Development Goals. Although some countries were way ahead in achieving them, so the developing countries were really backward. They hadn't achieved much of these goals, which means they were not successful. Now, what to do? So now it was realized that in 2015, let's adopt another set of goals, 17 in number. By the end of 2030, we shall be able to achieve them. This time, 100% pakka we will do it, that kind of thing. And these were known as Sustainable Development Goals. So in a way, you can say that the Sustainable Development Goals are a successor of the previous Millennium Development Goals. So do remember that, alright? Now, Sustainable Development Goals, total 17 in number, are supposed to be achieved by 2030. That is the target now. And they were adopted in 2015 when the Millennium Development Goals ended, when they failed to achieve the target. That was when we adopted the SDGs. So now it is so important for us to know as students of sociology, more than that, as aspirants of UPSC exam, because this topic is really very important for your UPSC. Now, across economics, across political science, across public administration, across sociology, across anthropology, across even geography. So we cannot avoid this really. So these are 17 in number. Now I am not expecting, or nobody rather would, that you should know them one by one, that one stands for this and the second one stands for this. But out of total 17, 11 are very, very important, which means most of the questions can be targeted towards 11 SDGs out of total 17. And there's another catch here. Even India as a country and as a society has not been able to successfully achieve these 11 goals out of 17. Why? And what are these goals? Come, let's have a look. To begin with, the very first SDG, if we talk about, it is about ending poverty or anti-poverty mechanism. End poverty in all its forms everywhere on the planet. That is SDG 1. Now you know better. What are these SDGs with special reference to India? As I said, the SDG 1 is about no poverty. For example, SDG 2 is about no hunger, zero hunger. Okay, so there are many such important ones. Before that, what has India really been doing to achieve these goals? How serious and how committed we are, or are we as a civil society, in achieving all these 17 targets? So for that, the Indian government exclusively decided to create something which is known as SDG India Index, or the Sustainable Development Goal India Index. This was done to measure how successful have we been in implementing all these 17 goals, and what was the strategy, what was the method that India used to achieve them. The method as such was known as whole of society method. Now, what is whole of society method? All sociology students will understand this better, because we know that right from Emile Durkheim to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, somebody who is close to sociology always gives importance to society over individual. For us as students of sociology, we are pakka enemies of psychologists and students of psychology. There is no relationship possible in terms of friendship and in terms of bonhomie among students of psychology and sociology. The former would say that everything is individual mind, and we will say nothing. Individual is nothing, society is important. Let's go back to Durkheim. Society is a reality sui generis. It is way more important than individual. Society is everything. Social force is important. Be it from your classical sociology to movies like Kantara, which all of you must have seen, where they talk about the role that society plays, the force that society creates on the minds of individuals, which acts as social control. We know that we are all absolutely in love with society, to the extent that we don't bother about ourselves. We are nothing, we are just agents of society. That's what we say often in sociology. So do remember, Indian government, on a very similar note, also adopted the approach which is called whole of society approach. Now this means that alone the government or alone the communities cannot achieve SDGs. What we really need is a systems approach. And what is a systems approach, by the way? A system approach is also something like what your Emile Durkheim says, that society is more important than individual. Unless all components of society come together, they work in coalition and collaboration, nothing is possible. Similarly, Indian government has adopted this approach, which means that the union government has to join hands with the local governments, the state governments, NGOs, and many other groups and communities in India, along with private sector companies, to achieve the SDGs. Alone, one party or one or two components of society cannot do that. And how much are we successful? To measure that, India then became one of the first countries to create the SDG India Index. Now, suddenly, why is the government so obsessed about SDGs? All these years we were sleeping. Today, suddenly, everyone is talking about SDG. What is happening? Are we achieving? Are we failing? Why is such obsession about SDG suddenly? It's not a sudden obsession, there is a reason. Actually, 2030 is just around the corner. 3 years went with COVID virus. We didn't even realize that from 2020, we're almost entering 2023, which also means only 7 years left to 2030, which is the target year for SDG. And today we know, when we do the reverse calculation, that we are lacking, we are way behind in achieving our targets. And therefore, this last decade, from 2021 to 2030, is often known as the decade of action. Why is it the decade of action? Because it is now the last decade or the last 10 years that we have left before the time expires for achieving SDGs, which is 2030. Okay, so do remember this. This is a very important decade, and hence, whether we are a failure or whether we are a success, it becomes really important to recalibrate upon this now. So, before we start analyzing each of these goals separately, till now, what have we learned? And till now, how has this webinar really helped us? One thing, you know about the Millennium Development Goals. Now you know about the Sustainable Development Goals. You understand better what's the meaning of the word sustainability. You also know when were they adopted, 2015. You know what is the target year, 2030. You know when were Millennium Development Goals adopted, 2000. When did they fail, 2015. You know who coined the word sustainable development. You know about the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit of 1992. You also know now about, what did I tell you? The very first SDG was about no poverty. Plus, you also know something about who created the report called Our Common Future or the Brundtland Report, right? This much we agree or this much we don't agree. So, with these takeaways, now let's begin with another chapter about SDGs. Now, learning about SDGs so far, when you talk about India's achievement, well, there is a problem. There is a problem because we know that yes, you learned about the summit of 1992. Brilliant. Yes, very well said. Now, 2015 is a very special year for students of sociology. Why? Why? Because 2015 was also the year of schemes, as somebody just mentioned. So many schemes of the government started in 2015. So many of them, uncountable number of them. So when I teach social justice, I always tell my students, they ask me, there are so many schemes, ma'am. Ujjwala, Nirbhaya Fund, the Pradhan Mantri Matru Vandana Yojana, then Swadhar scheme, Smile scheme. Oh, it's tiring. And I always tell them, don't worry. The one standard thing is everything started with 2015. That's the best thing. So 2015 is a super important year. Never forget that. All right. And SDGs were also adopted in 2015. Now, talking about India's performance, well, definitely it's not up to the mark. Definitely we are lagging behind when it comes to achieving SDGs. But the saddest and the most tragic aspect is that we are much behind many other already so-called backward countries. For example, we are actually way behind all South Asian nations except Pakistan. And that's a very bad thing. That's a very tragic thing to happen. And we also know as that India has further slipped on its ranking in terms of achieving 17 SDGs. Why? Because from 117, the rank has fallen to 120 now. And apart from that, India, apart from Pakistan, is way behind the South Asian average as well. And India's overall sustainable development goal score was 66 out of 100. Again, that's pretty bad. Why? Why have we lagged behind so badly? We have lagged behind so badly for many reasons. While on the one hand, we have done very, very well when it comes to schemes like Anganwadi, midday meal scheme, reducing the rate of maternal mortality, reducing the rate of child and infant mortality, increasing the rate of rural electrification. But we are lagging behind in many important factors. The biggest one happens to be that we are lagging behind when it comes to SDG 1, no poverty. Because today also, we are suffering with huge poverty. But what kind of poverty? Now, as students of UPSC and sociology, it doesn't look good when you talk about poverty. Don't say poverty. Always say multidimensional poverty because now you know. Now you know. After the multidimensional poverty index, global index that was released in 2021, the Niti Aayog also released its own multi-dimensional poverty index for India. So therefore, today we do not understand poverty only in the sense of income poverty. You are poor because you have no income or you have less money. Not like that. Today we measure poverty based on 12 criteria, which sometimes includes things like access to drinking water, access to banking services, access to food, access to medical facilities, access to education, access to social interaction. There is so much more now. So always use the word multi-dimensional poverty. We also know that as per the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index 2021 in India, the problem of poverty is not just economic, it is gravely cultural and social. Because 6 out of every 7 people who are multidimensionally poor, they happen to be from either the SC or the ST community or the OBC community. So our society is really very complicated when we talk about understanding why have we lagged behind in achieving the SDGs. Now, India is actually suffering on accounts of 11 SDGs, as I told you. Out of 17, there are 11 sustainable goals which we absolutely are lagging behind in. For example, talking about good health, not for everyone really, and well-being. Gender equality, now that's a major problem. You also should know that as per the Global Gender Equality Index, now India happens to be way behind Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, when you talk about women's participation in the labor force. or women contribution in the labor force of the country, which means gender bias is extremely high. Even if you talk about the 0 to 6 years child sex ratio, it is very, very screwed up because there are very few girls as compared to boys, whereas the overall sex ratio has improved, but the child sex ratio is not improving. There is a good evidence to believe that females are more malnourished, and we still have practices like sex selective abortion. So in India, that's a major concern. And then, of course, we have a problem of creating sustainable cities which are equally accessible to everyone. Now, do remember UN right to city. That's again a problem with India. And in India, the problem is not just failing on accounts of 11 SDGs. The problem becomes even more complicated because it is not uniform. From north to south, east to west, some states are pretty well. Some states are performing quite well. For example, if you talk about Kerala. Now, Kerala, talking about the 17 SDGs, let's quickly see them. First, we'll come to know what are these goals. I will also tell you which ones to focus upon more from the standpoint of your GS paper 1 and 2 and sociology. Besides, let's see if India has failed, why, and let's see if it has succeeded, how. Alright, so talking about the SDG 1, which is finish poverty in all its forms everywhere in the world by 2030. Now, a very ambitious goal, of course. Talking about Indian society. Now, the problem is that Indian government is dealing with a massive problem of poverty. It comes as a part of our inherited structure as well. Okay, it comes as a part of our inherited structure as well because we have been facing multi-dimensional poverty because we also deal with problems such as regional distribution of minerals and resources. Certain states are very agriculturally good because they are blessed with natural resources. Some are not. Some have a very poor soil and a very difficult mountainous terrain. Another reason is gender inequality because we know that women who are almost half the population but still because of culture biases, they haven't been, representing as much in the technical education, higher education, and therefore the labor force. That's again one problem. Problems of caste discrimination, the problems of alienation of tribals, problem of communal violence. Now, these are certain things which have further increased the problems of India's poverty as such. But it doesn't mean that the government has not taken enough role. Yes, definitely I'll talk about it. Public health. Why not? So the problem is it's not like Indian government has not taken initiatives. What has the Indian government really been doing? Now, when you talk about social protection and safety nets, how has the government tried to create some kind of equality or benefit or some kind of welfare for the poor people or people below the poverty line? Of course, we talk about the National Social Assistance Program, which means that the government here provides 5 kind of pension programs. Who are the beneficiaries? There are 5 categories of pensions that are given. One to people who are differently abled or people with disability. Another is given to the widows. Third, provided to people who are very, very poor, like below the poverty line. Another set is given to people who are geriatric population or those who are above 60 years of age. So all the vulnerable segments of the population, all of them who are vulnerable segments of the population are accorded some kind of pension programs by the government. That's a very important initiative taken by the government. Then, so even children under 6, they are also provided some special benefits by the government. Then there is a scheme known as Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, which again talks about providing 100 days of assured guaranteed labor and wage salary to people in the rural segments. All one adult member of all the poor households shall be given some kind of construction or manual work in return of some daily minimum basic wage. Again, this is a very helpful program. Now, certain quota here is reserved for people or categories like women, SC, ST. Now, again, that's a very important thing done by the government. Besides that, the government also talks about access to nutrition in the form of Poshan Abhiyan. We can talk about the Food Security Act, where in 2013 the government decided geriatric means people who are old, above 60 years of age. They are also vulnerable in a big way. Yeah, that's a very well said suggestion. Yes, out of pocket expenditure, brilliant suggestion. We'll talk about it in the medical and health aspect. Very well said. Now, under the National Food Security Act, the government talks about giving subsidized food grains to at least 2/3 of the 1.2 billion population, which means people under the below poverty line level, they shall be provided with some kind of food distribution system through public food distribution channels or the ration card, or you can say the fair shops, which give them subsidized food grains from the government. So this is done through the National Food Corporation. All these are done in order to enable people to, get some basic minimum level of nutrition. Plus, the government also monitors progress through its own SDG India index. So it's not like the government is not trying enough, but it is a very ambitious target given that poverty now is completely multidimensional and the population is huge. You know that India is almost on the verge of overtaking the population of China by 2023. Now that is also something we know. And recently, the world population has also hit a very big mark. What is that mark? 8 billion, absolutely. Now, again, which means that we are dealing with massive population pressure. So the SDGs acquire a whole new meaning. So do remember that. Now, SDG 2, again, a very ambitious plan, talks about zero hunger, ending hunger everywhere in all its forms. Now, it also talks about, therefore, improving nutrition, promoting sustainable agriculture. Now, do remember, hunger is a yes, absolutely. Hunger is a very abstract concept. A lot of people feel that hunger is about not getting enough quantity of food. But when you study social issues, you know that hunger is much more than that. So hunger can be of various kinds. When you talk about not getting enough calories, it becomes undernourishment. When you talk about getting enough calories but not all micronutrients, it becomes hidden hunger, or it becomes undernourishment in a way that you are not calorie deficit, but you are not having enough nutrition. Therefore, undernourishment or hidden hunger is also known as malnourishment. This is different from hunger. Then comes the third category called protein hunger, where you are eating a lot of food, you are very fat and healthy, you look fine, but you don't take adequate quantities of protein in your diet. In India, again, that's a major problem, given that a majority population is vegetarian, and there is a very big bias, when it comes to the food basket of poor consumers. They don't have enough of everything. It's a very carbohydrate oriented diet. So therefore, we have protein hunger. Now, apart from that, we also have in children, we see things like child wasting, child stunting. Okay, so all these things are also happening because there is massive malnourishment prevailing in India. So do remember that. And what has the government been doing to tackle these problems? Domestic food production is being enhanced. The agriculture land under cultivation per hectare is planned to be increased by the government. The capacity to import right kind of food is being increased. But the most important thing that is being done is about increasing household purchasing power capacity by ensuring that people can at least buy the minimum required quantity of food that's necessary. In this, there is another very important role played by National Food Security Act 2013. As I said, it is planning to provide subsidized food grains to a majority of those people who really need them. Then you talk about Pradhan Mantri Matritva. In English, it's called Matru. In Hindi, it's known as Matritva or Matra, which means maternal, something associated with giving birth or motherly. So this yojana is targeted at women of urban and rural India under the poverty line level or under the BPL. They are given a help of rupees 6,000 for having their first child, or if they are in the breastfeeding period, so that they can get required medication institutional delivery, which is having a child in the hospital properly under medical care, and also she can have nourished food so that she can breastfeed her child. Again, very important for child undernourishment. Then you talk about increasing agriculture and livestock productivity. Plus, you also talk about food fortification. Now you know that Indian government is doing very ambitious plan of fortifying food grains. For example, if you talk about Siyar Dhan, it is a variety of rice which is fortified with protein now. More specifically, CR Dhan 310. It's a kind of rice which has fortification done with protein so that people get more protein intake. Similarly, you have a variety of wheat which is known as Atlas 66. Now again, this is a biofortified variety, which means only after having wheat, like because your main staple diet is atta or chapati. So since it's fortified, you can get many more micronutrients under this. Yes, absolutely. That's brilliantly pointed out by you. Yes, even PMJKAY. Absolutely. Brilliant. Yes. So these are certain things which the government has been undertaking. There is one more thing here which I shall mention when we proceed with another goal. I'll talk about that. Now, the third goal here is about good health and well-being, so that you are promoting a well-being and good health for everyone in the country. Here, a very important role is played by National Health Policy 2017, which aims at affordability and availability, both these aspects, very important. One thing is, as somebody just mentioned to me, out of pocket expenditure. In India, a major problem for poor people or vulnerable segments of society is that whenever they want to see a doctor, especially after the COVID pandemic, the medical expenses out of pocket have increased. There is hardly any medical insurance for people. Neither do people in India are very aware about medical insurance. They need to pay out of their own savings, and that is what causes a cycle of debt and poverty. So this health policy is also talking about providing maximum public health accessible to people at an affordable rate. So affordability and accessibilities are the two pillars of this policy. Apart from that, the government talks about free insurance card. The free health insurance card is known as Ayushman Bharat. Now, do remember in 2022, just last month, the government has spoken about something which is known as providing Ayushman Bharat or free public health insurance card to people from transgender communities. because they face a major stigma and exclusion. But sometimes they need to go for gender realignment surgery, they need to go for hormonal therapy. Even there are other normal health problems which they face just like anyone else. So therefore, bringing them under the ambit of Ayushman Bharat is again a very, very big social justice mechanism which the government has thought about. Please note this down and do study about this. This transgender and their inclusion in Ayushman Bharat is very important from the point of view of your upcoming exam. Okay, so this is also something that's being done. Under this, people who are the card holders can avail primary and secondary health services absolutely for free in government hospitals. Now, similarly, there is a problem. The government says that there should be one doctor available for at least 1,000 patients. That's the minimum benchmark. But in India, there is just one available for almost 1,456 patients as per the data of 2014 onwards. Now, this is a very, very dangerous situation, which means people aren't getting effective medical attention. So, to avoid this situation, the Prime Minister of India recently announced that we will open another set of medical colleges at every 5 kilometers distance, which means more and more children shall be encouraged to take up medical studies, more doctors for a better society. Also, people will get free and easy access to medical hospitals. That's one important thing. Now, government is also trying to bring down the rate of maternal mortality, but in this, India is quite successful. So we can say this is a good situation for India. It is somewhere India has registered a victory, a win, because maternal mortality, the number of women who die while giving birth, that has reduced tremendously in India, which is a very good thing indeed. But the problem is child mortality is quite on the higher side. Reason? I told you in the other webinar, if you remember, if you were there, that in India, 57% of women between the age of 15 to 49 are anemic. They have a low level of hemoglobin in their body. Okay. Now, there are two kinds of anemias, two kinds of iron deficiencies. One happens because of lack of hemoglobin in the body, which is the iron. Okay. Iron. Another is which happens because of a deficiency of folic acid or sometimes even vitamin B12. These are two kinds of anemias very prominent among Indian women in the reproductive age group. This leads to having a child with low birth weight. Again, it also leads to infant and child mortality in the long run. So do focus on that when you talk about the relationship between maternal and child mortality. So these are certain things India is targeting towards. Talking about the fourth goal, which is about quality education. Now here, what you really need to remember is that yes, Ayushman Bharat has been increased, brilliant. And hidden hunger is therefore also known as malnourishment. It means that you think you are eating a lot, but in reality, there is something missing in your diet. Yeah, lack of family planning, of course. Unwanted early pregnancies, early marriages. There is a slew, a plethora of problems, really. Now, when I talk about SDG 4, there are three things I'm telling you. Please, friends, do remember this. The first thing to remember is that back in 2002, there was an amendment that was added to the Indian Constitution, and I'm sure you know about that. That's the 86th Constitutional Amendment. Now, this added an article to the Constitution known as Article 21A, which said that now right to education will become a fundamental right. Before this, it was a directive principle of state policy, which means it wasn't binding on the government. But after this 86th Amendment Act and Article 21A, it became absolutely binding on the government because now it is a fundamental right. Every child from the age group, say for example, age group of 6 to 14 years, they have absolutely a fundamental right to study, to get educated in primary, secondary, and higher education. They absolutely have a right specifically to primary education. Now, as a result of this amendment that was done in 2002, later in 2009, the government passed the Right to Education Act. It was formally implemented from 2009 to 2010 period. And this Right to Information Act again means that India becomes one out of other 135 countries where right to education exists in the form of a fundamental right, which means children between 6 to 14 years of age will absolutely be in school. No kind of child labor shall be tolerated. Apart from that, even in schools, the child cannot be hit. You cannot become violent with the child. Parents will be punished if the child is found outside school. The child has a right to free education in all government and public institutions. All these are provisions made under the Act. In reality, they aren't being followed. We know that. But it exists as a right. So you must remember that. Now, with inspiration from right to education, once again, do remember that India has had a history of national education policies. And India now, strangely, is one such society where till date we have had only three education policies. The very first one had come in 1968. The second one came in 1986. And now the latest one came in 2020, the National Education Policy 2020. And this is a very ambitious policy because for the first time, government is paying attention on promoting vocational education. Vocational education and imparting skill to people. Why? Because now the aim of education policy is not only to produce doctors and engineers and architects and teachers, but it's also to promote self-employment. Why? We'll talk about it shortly from now. Just hold on. So, why? Because people want to take up more and more opportunities for employing themselves, of entrepreneurship, the huge population that we have. Now, everybody cannot get accommodated in the job market. We need to create a market and you can say an ecosystem of self-employment. How will that be possible? If you teach vocational skills right from the school level. So that's one thing here. Another very important thing is that the new educational policy 2022 talks about creating a system of education which is 5 plus 3 plus 4. What is happening really? 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. Now, as per this new education policy, the old system of 10 plus 2 education will be replaced by a new system, which means 12 years of compulsory school education. Added to this will be 3 years of compulsory Anganwadi education. Anganwadi education, pre-primary education, or preparatory school education. Now, that's again very important. Article 21A was added as a result of 86th Amendment Act, which means now right to education is a fundamental right. Before this, it was a part of directive principles of state policy. Now it's a fundamental right. We have to provide all children of India education. It's the right that they can claim. Okay, so that's what we mean there. Yeah, just like developed countries. Absolutely, well said there. So now we have a system which is about 12 years of schooling plus 3 years of Anganwadi. So these are certain things you must remember when you talk about leaving no one behind. That's the agenda of SDG 4, which India has acquired. Now, talking about SDG 5, this is all about creating a society with gender equality, a society where women and girls are empowered. But before we know about this more, what do you even mean by the word empowerment? It's taking a lot of initiatives in this regard. The very first important being Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Very important one to promote girl child education. You have a one-stop center scheme which is financed through Nirbhaya Fund, which means under one help desk, everything will be available to victims of violence, domestic violence or any other violence outside the family. From police help to psychiatric help to medical help to rehabilitation. All of this under one police desk that's available. Then you have things like Ujjwala scheme, where the government provides free LPG gas connections to a lot of women under poverty level. Similarly, you have Swadhar Griha scheme, a place where women can be rehabilitated. Those who are poor, homeless, and destitute, or abandoned women, such things are done. Then you also have things like Mahila Shakti Kendra and Nirbhaya helpline, where women who are suffering violence or molestation or who is fearing any kind of attack, she can actually call and the help shall be available to her. So lots of initiatives and many more than these the government has been constantly taking. Here you can also talk about Pradhan Mantri Matritva Vandana Yojana, you can talk about the Janani Suraksha Yojana and so many more. Then, if you talk about the clean water and sanitation, you know that India is having a problem because while we have only 4% of global fresh water reserves, the population is almost 17%. Which means there is less availability of resources like water and there are more people demanding it. So what do we need to do here? A lot of measures the government has been taking, one such being the Jal Shakti Abhiyan or the Jal Shakti campaign for conserving rainwater, preserving water, or renovating, cleaning up, and maintaining various water bodies and wetlands. Then, Swachh Bharat Mission, again very important because it talks about stopping the practice of open defecation near water bodies. Also, creating cleanliness and hygiene around it, which prevents us from abusing the water resources that we actually have. Well, no, it's not important that you remember all the schemes, but it's so important that you remember two schemes for everything. For example, two for education, two for example, menstrual hygiene, two when you talk about women's employment perspectives, two when you talk about violence, two, for example, when you talk about political empowerment. So two everywhere shall be enough. Poshan Abhiyan, yes, we'll talk about it shortly. Yeah, all this is current affairs, I agree. Very, very close to sociology and social justice. SDG 7 talks about affordable and clean energy. Now, you know that India is also the initiator of the International Solar Alliance. When was it created? Any guesses there? I know when I tell, everybody will laugh. So you only tell. No. 2014 plus 1. 2014 plus 1. Yeah, actually 2015. So I told you there is something with 2015 that we have, and I knew everybody will give me that laughing, emoji because it is funny. Like everything 2015. It's like sociology was born for us in 2015. So 2015 is when India introduced the ISA, the International Solar Alliance in, Gurugram. That is Gurgaon, which people call it. Why? Because India is a very, very sunshine country. We get a good amount of solar energy. So India is promoting in a big way. You can say development and the industry which is running on clean energy. For example, India is focusing now on green hydrogen, which is also called the green hydrogen bomb, as you call it. Plus, India is also talking about creating a situation where petrol is mixed with ethanol by 2025 so that emissions are reduced. India is also investing big time in natural gas. Okay, why? Because now we need to run most of our vehicles on industries on natural gas. So a lot of importance is being done to create renewable energy resources so that emission targets become less. Why? Because India really wants to achieve its nationally determined contributions, NDCs, by 2030. NDCs means India has also promised to cut down its emissions by 33% by 2030. Under this, the government talks about Pradhan Mantri Sahaj Bijli Har Ghar Yojana, providing each house in rural and urban areas with electricity. That's crucial. India has also promised 40% of its energy will become renewable recently in 2019, very soon. So, which means that we are talking about the SDG 8. It is about decent work structure and economic growth. So, in this, India is trying to create structural reforms for making India a very proper startup innovation hub. Now, India has a lot of potential for startups and entrepreneurship. We know that India is today one of the leading innovation hotspots, hotspots in the world. To promote this, we are trying to take up steps like Startup India Mission, okay, and Skill India campaign. We are talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat. We are also talking about things like Goods and Services Tax 2060, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Of course, there is Social Security Code also 2020. So all these things are done so that labor laws are in place. Plus, ease of doing business is created. The people who are starting new companies, those who want to take up entrepreneurship, help and hand holding shall be available to them to create a much better productive ecosystem. We talk about SDG 9. It is again talking about things like promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, promoting innovation. For this, Indian government is promoting ease of doing business. For example, much before say 2016, it was really difficult for somebody beginning a new company or a new business. Why? Because there was a lot of formality involved. Registration, you had to have a minimum capital, you had to have a minimum investment there. All those things were necessary. Today, the government, through easy, simple loaning, through everything available online, through providing a lot of sops like free electricity for beginning a new company in remote rural areas, the government is providing a lot of ease and help to entrepreneurs, to actually start and create their own companies. So India now has really come up, and here it's becoming much easier to do business now. Earlier, people would rush to China and Vietnam, even when they wanted to start up some manufacturing unit. But now even India is listed as one of the most attractive place for foreign direct investment because the government has actually fostered the climate of innovation and business startups. You talk about SDG 10. It is about reducing inequality within and among countries, which means intra-inequalities and inter-inequalities. Intra is when you talk about within the country. Now, in various dimensions, the government has tried to create much better research into gender, social, political, economic aspects of the population. And the government also realizes that in India, literally, for example, the geriatric population, elderly people who are vulnerable in India, they are almost 8.6% of the population. What kind of social security do they need? What kind of UN conventions can be adopted to provide them security? So all these things are also being given big time to promote the betterment of vulnerable segments of society. And SDG 11 talks about sustainable cities. Here, please go back and do read about the UN Right to City. UN Right to City is a mechanism which says, this question came up in 2021 UPSC prelims, about UN Right to City. What is that? It means that absolutely, the Sri Jan portal, beautiful. It is a portal where, not just India is also now, this also reminds me, thank you so much for this prompt. This also reminds me to tell you, when you talk about geriatric population, which is vulnerable in India, do study about silver economy. What is silver economy? You must know this for social justice. Silver economy is the economy which caters to the need of old people. For example, Japan is already a silver economy. South Korea will soon become one. India is also planning to move towards that, where goods and services are catered and they are created to be consumed by elderly people more than by young people. That's a silver economy. And India is moving towards that. So the Street and Portal is an initiative which is for that, all those things. To read that. Now, talking about SDG 11, you must know that UN Right to City says that every resident of Indian city will have a right to infrastructure, electricity, sanitation, medical, health, and employment facilities. So all things that city provides should be enjoyed by everyone. We need to cut this digital divide and the distance between poor and people who are well off. So to create a more democratic city, that's what we are talking about, which is safe, resilient, and sustainable, therefore. So this is something we must remember. Now, SDG 12 talks about responsible consumption and responsible production. Again, this reminds us of something which is known as eco-friendly industry, and eco-friendly agriculture. For example, we also need to protect soil health when we are doing agriculture. It's equally important. For example, it's so important that the government talks about energy conservation building code. So all these things are done so that whatever market operations happen, they shouldn't be compromising absolutely upon your ecological health. That is sustainable. You can say consumption and production. Similarly, reducing wastage, that is also very crucial. SDG 30 talks about urgent climate action. India is among the top 10 countries, which is very, very good news for us in the Climate Change Performance Index 2020. Why? Because India has really tried to bring down the per capita level of emission and energy use. Again, that is very, very good because India is moving towards achieving its NDCs. Then SDG 14, it is about life below water. So here we talk about conserving ocean water, seas and marine resources by cutting down on plastic use, especially single plastic use. Single plastic use like plastic straw, plastic spoon, plastic glass. So all these are ultimately landing up into oceans, and that's something we must take care of. Then you talk about life on land. Life on land talks about the decision that should be made by the country to protect endangered faunal species or endangered animal species. Now, this again should remind you of the Wildlife Conservation Act, of the Project Elephant, of the Tiger Conservation Mission. So all these things which initiated back in 1972 and 1973 do talk about preserving all the species that are endangered. Today, the government is employing drones to study the real situation and the problems that are being, confronted by the species which are on the verge of extinction. Similarly, in the Kaziranga, one-horned rhinoceros sanctuary in Assam, what has the government done? First thing is the government removed the horn from the baby rhinos because it was the horn for which the rhinos were being hunted because it is believed that the horn has some medication property. So people were poaching them. Now they are not killing them as much because the horn is not there. It's blunted at the beginning of life. Then, second thing is the government has also started a new system where it is partnering with the tribals and the villagers, and they are also providing some kind of assistance to the government. Why? To protect against theft and protect against poaching. Absolutely, you can talk about COP 15, COP 27, the one that recently concluded in Egypt, COP 27. Absolutely, you must talk about that. Similarly, olive ridley turtle, as somebody mentioned, brilliant. Odisha is the state that reminds you of olive ridley turtle. The population has come down because there is population and tourists everywhere, and the turtles are not coming out for breeding. They are very scared. So those are certain animal species that we can talk about. Similarly, python and whichever else you know there. Then you talk about SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Here, it is more related to, you can say, the political science, where we talk about a better system of providing equality to people who are within the prison, even for prisoners, what kind of training, what kind of skill enhancement, what kind of psychiatric help can be provided. So all these things we can talk about. Then, of course, we can also talk about communal violence. What does the government and society do for really bringing down such cases? The SDG 17 talks about creating partnership to achieve the goals. For example, increasing domestic resource mobilization, again, improving public expenditure, promoting entrepreneurship in the private sector, and many such things like coalition based on partnership between public enterprises and the private sector units, improving data monitoring and accountability so that the government knows the extent of problem which various segments are facing. Now, there is one thing which escaped out of my mind. I just remember that when we were talking about SDG 12, I really wanted to tell you also about something which is known as Poshan Vatika. I'm not sure if you have heard about Poshan Vatika already. You can include absolutely Tihar, but that's a brilliant thing. You can talk about Kiran Bedi and how she has, mobilized or inspired a lot of prison reforms. You can also talk about that. Yeah, absolutely, tax reduction there. You can talk about that. Now, does anybody know about Poshan Vatika or nourishment gardens? So that is also one thing that Indian government has recently started. Now, Poshan Vatika means that the government is encouraging farmers and people in the rural areas to come and do some kind of organic vegetable gardening without using any pesticide, without using any fertilizer, without using any kind of medicine or any chemicals. Natural organic agriculture. And the focus is supposed to be on coarse grains. Coarse grains, high complex carbohydrate diet. For example, ragi, nachini, bajra, makkah, gram flour, things like flaxseed, all these things, sabja seeds. Why? Because this is the traditional, typical Indian diet. This is what we used to consume. Maize, barley. We never used to consume things like bread and wheat so much. and rice so much. Typically, we were consuming more of coarse grains, and therefore nobody had diabetes and cancer and high blood pressure. Today, after Green Revolution, we became a society obsessed with either eating wheat or either eating rice. These are simple carbohydrates. They really raise your insulin, and therefore this leads you to a lot of diabetes and a lot of things like hypertension and heart attacks. That's why India is also now the heart attack capital of the world. To promote the coarse grain, typical traditional Indian diet in a very organic way, Poshan Vatikas are being created by the government. So do talk about that and do read something on it, okay? Yeah, millets, very good. And thanks for mentioning. Brilliant. 2023 is the national year for millets. Yes. Millets, again, coarse grains that we should eat. For example, a lot of people also in India earlier would consume things like, the buckwheat and things like rajgir, or, I'm not getting the right name for it, something which is known as the samakka rice. It also has a name in English. And so a lot of these things were a part of Indian staple diet. If you ask your grandparents, they will actually know that, we used to eat this, and it was not as good looking as pizza, or maybe it was not as attractive as the biryani or the pulao, but these are way more nourishing, and all of us will eat that actually generations before. It's only after Green Revolution and Westernization that things are changing. But Amranth, thank you so much. Yes, it's Amranth. It's really very healthy. Good ghee, all these things. The name is endless. So do talk about Poshan Vatika there. So going back to this means good health for all of us. So this is practically all the SDGs and Indian performance. Already so much so of SDG that we have 4 more topics to go. So the question here for you is that, do you think that goals set by Sustainable Development Goals can be met by India before the targeted period of 2030? Examine the preparedness of the government related to achieve these goals. Now, I'm not saying do it today, do it tomorrow, Jowar as well. Millet Sister Award given to, yeah, Mughal Amma. Absolutely, Mughlu Amma. Yes, we should know these things. These are super important. Now, can you all tell me, please, that's a request from my side now, after this discussion on SDGs and Indian experience, at least can we try writing something on this? I'm not saying you go today and write it and, things like those, but can we try? Say maybe today, tomorrow, day after, this week. Can we try? After all the Christmas and all the New Year hangama is over, can you actually sit back and try the question? Do you think it's relatable? Yeah? Okay. Thanks a ton for that. That's really, really encouraging. Should you have any problems, you can please write down to us. If you want your answer to be examined, again, you can write down to us, not a problem.